11 strategic bridges. That's the number Russia is now reportedly scrambling to protect after Ukraine's latest long-range strikes targeted some of the most critical logistics routes connected to the southern battlefield. If these reports are confirmed, this isn't just another drone attack. This could directly affect how Russia moves troops, ammunition, fuel, armoured vehicles, and reinforcements across some of the most important military corridors in the entire war. Military history has repeatedly shown that wars are often decided not only by the size of an army, but by whether that army can keep its soldiers supplied. And that's exactly why analysts across Europe, the United States, and Russia are paying close attention to these latest developments. Because when bridges begin collapsing, supply chains begin slowing. When supply chains slow, military operations become harder to sustain. And when that happens, even a powerful army can face serious operational challenges. Today, we're breaking down what actually happened, why these bridges matter far more than many headlines suggest, and whether Ukraine's latest strategy could change the battlefield in the months ahead. You're watching Emily Carter. To understand why these reported bridge strikes have attracted so much attention, we first need to understand how Russia's southern logistics network actually works. Modern wars are not won simply by advancing on the battlefield. Every soldier, every tank, every artillery system, and every drone depends on an enormous supply chain operating behind the front lines. Fuel has to arrive every day. Ammunition has to be constantly replenished. Damaged vehicles require repairs. Fresh troops must rotate into combat zones while exhausted units rotate out. If any part of that system slows down, the pressure is immediately felt on the front line. This is why bridges are considered high-value military targets. A single bridge can carry thousands of vehicles every week, including military trucks transporting artillery shells, armoured vehicles, engineering equipment, medical supplies, and food. Unlike warehouses or temporary positions, bridges cannot simply be moved somewhere else. They become fixed choke points, making them attractive targets during prolonged conflicts. According to publicly available battlefield reports, Ukraine has increasingly focused its long-range capabilities on infrastructure supporting Russian military logistics. Instead of trying to destroy every vehicle individually, the strategy appears designed to slow the movement of those vehicles before they even reach the battlefield. Military planners often describe this as attacking the enemy's ability to fight rather than only attacking the fighting force itself. The reported strikes on multiple bridges have therefore raised an important question. Was Ukraine trying to isolate parts of Russia's southern logistics network? If several transportation routes become unavailable at the same time, supply convoys may have to travel much longer distances. That means more fuel consumption, longer delivery times, greater exposure to surveillance, and additional pressure on military engineers responsible for maintaining transportation routes. Crimea remains especially important in this discussion. Since 2022, it has served as one of Russia's most significant military hubs for operations in southern Ukraine. Equipment, personnel, and supplies have frequently moved through transportation corridors connected to the peninsula before reaching active combat areas. Because of that role, any disruption affecting routes linked to Crimea naturally attracts international attention. However, it's equally important not to exaggerate the immediate impact. Modern militaries usually prepare backup plans for infrastructure attacks. Russia possesses engineering units capable of repairing damaged bridges, building temporary crossings, deploying pontoon bridges, and rerouting traffic when necessary. Military logistics systems are designed with redundancy because commanders know that important infrastructure will likely become targets during wartime. That's why analysts remain cautious. One successful strike rarely changes the course of a war overnight. The real question is whether repeated attacks over weeks or months begin creating cumulative pressure. If engineers are forced to repair the same infrastructure repeatedly while transport routes remain under constant threat, logistical efficiency may gradually decline even if complete disruption never occurs. Another reason these attacks matter is psychological pressure. Every reported strike forces commanders to reconsider security around supply routes. More air defences may be required. Additional patrols may need to protect bridges and transport hubs. Resources that might otherwise support frontline operations are instead diverted toward defending infrastructure. Even without destroying large amounts of equipment, forcing an opponent to spread resources more thinly can provide a strategic advantage. Technology has also transformed this battlefield. Long-range drones, precision-guided missiles, satellite imagery, and real-time intelligence now allow both Russia and Ukraine to identify critical infrastructure with far greater accuracy than in previous wars. Instead of launching massive bombing campaigns, modern militaries increasingly rely on precision strikes against carefully selected targets that can produce disproportionate operational effects. For Ukraine, that strategy may offer one important benefit. Precision attacks require fewer resources than large-scale offensives while still creating operational challenges for the opposing side. For Russia, defending hundreds of kilometers of transportation infrastructure becomes increasingly difficult as long-range strike capabilities continue evolving. This brings us to the next critical question. If Ukraine continues targeting logistics instead of only frontline positions, how is Russia likely to respond? Will Moscow strengthen its defences, accelerate infrastructure repairs, or launch even larger retaliatory strikes against Ukrainian military facilities? In the next part, we'll examine Russia's possible response and whether this latest phase of the war could lead to another major escalation. If Ukraine's objective is to slow Russia's military logistics, then the obvious question becomes, how is Russia likely to respond? Military analysts generally agree that Moscow is unlikely to leave critical transportation corridors vulnerable for long. Throughout the war, Russia has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to repair damaged infrastructure, establish temporary crossings, and adapt its logistics network after Ukrainian strikes. But adaptation comes at a cost, and in modern warfare, every additional cost matters. One of Russia's first priorities will almost certainly be strengthening the protection of key logistics routes. That could involve deploying additional air defense systems near important bridges, increasing electronic warfare capabilities to interfere with Ukrainian drones, and expanding surveillance using reconnaissance aircraft and unmanned systems. The goal would be simple: detect incoming threats earlier and reduce the chances of successful strikes. Military engineers are also expected to play a crucial role. Russia has extensive engineering units trained to repair bridges, construct temporary crossings, and restore transportation routes under combat conditions. History shows that armies rarely depend on a single bridge or road. Instead, they develop multiple contingency plans in case major infrastructure is damaged. That means even if a bridge is temporarily disabled, military traffic can often be redirected through alternative routes, although those routes may be slower and less efficient. But this is where time becomes a strategic weapon. Every hour spent repairing a damaged bridge is an hour during which supplies may be delayed. Every detour increases fuel consumption. Every additional kilometre travelled places more wear on military vehicles. Individually, these problems may appear manageable. Collectively, however, they can gradually reduce operational efficiency, especially during prolonged military campaigns. At the same time, Russia is unlikely to respond only with defensive measures. Throughout the conflict, major Ukrainian strikes have often been followed by Russian long-range missile and drone attacks targeting Ukrainian military infrastructure. Airfields, ammunition depots, command centres, defence factories, energy facilities and logistics hubs have frequently become targets during periods of escalation. If Ukraine continues focusing on transportation infrastructure, analysts believe Russia could intensify efforts to disrupt Ukraine's own supply network as a form of strategic retaliation. Another important factor is the growing role of intelligence. Modern warfare is increasingly driven by information rather than sheer numbers. Satellites, reconnaissance, drones, electronic surveillance, and real-time battlefield data allow commanders to identify valuable targets with remarkable precision. That means the battle over logistics is no longer fought only with missiles. It is also fought through intelligence gathering, cyber capabilities, and electronic warfare. Whichever side can locate and protect its critical infrastructure more effectively gains a significant operational advantage. There is also the international dimension. Every major strike inside occupied territories is carefully monitored by governments across Europe and North America. Ukraine continues receiving military assistance from several Western countries, while Russia continues expanding defense cooperation with its own partners. As the conflict evolves, both sides are attempting not only to influence the battlefield, but also to demonstrate effectiveness to their respective allies. Successful operations can strengthen political support, while unsuccessful campaigns may raise questions about future military strategies. However, one point deserves emphasis. Despite dramatic headlines, no single bridge strike is likely to determine the outcome of the war. Modern conflicts are decided through a combination of logistics, manpower, industrial production, intelligence, technology, diplomacy, and economic endurance. Infrastructure attacks become strategically important only if they are sustained over time and integrated into a broader military campaign. That is exactly why military experts are watching these developments so closely. The real question is not whether one bridge was damaged. The real question is whether Ukraine is beginning a long-term campaign designed to systematically pressure Russia's logistics network while avoiding costly direct assaults on heavily defended frontline positions. If that strategy continues, the coming weeks could reveal whether these attacks represent isolated tactical successes or the beginning of a much larger effort to reshape the battlefield itself. In the next part, we'll examine whether this campaign could affect Russia's broader military objectives and whether it has the potential to influence the overall direction of the war. If Ukraine's strategy continues, the next question becomes even more important. Could repeated attacks on Russia's logistics network actually influence the direction of the war? Military historians often say that wars are won by the side that can sustain operations the longest, not necessarily by the side that wins the most individual battles. Firepower matters, troop numbers matter. But logistics often determines whether those advantages can be maintained over months or even years. Russia continues to control large areas of territory, and maintaining that control requires an enormous flow of supplies every single day. Thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, medical equipment, and engineering materials must move continuously from warehouses to frontline units. Any disruption to that system creates additional pressure on commanders responsible for maintaining operational momentum. This is one reason Ukraine has increasingly emphasized long-range precision strikes instead of relying exclusively on large-scale ground offensives. Rather than attacking heavily fortified positions head-on, Ukrainian forces have often attempted to target command centres, ammunition depots, fuel storage sites, railway junctions, and transportation infrastructure. The objective appears to be reducing Russia's ability to sustain military operations over time, rather than seeking immediate territorial gains. At the same time, Russia has been adapting its own strategy. Supply depots have reportedly been relocated farther from the front line in many areas. Camouflage techniques have improved. Air defence systems have been repositioned to protect high-value military infrastructure, and engineering units remain prepared to repair damaged transportation routes as quickly as possible. This constant cycle of attack and adaptation has become one of the defining features of the conflict. Another important consideration is resources. Infrastructure repairs require manpower, construction equipment, security personnel, and financial investment. Even if bridges are restored quickly, repeated repairs consume time and resources that could otherwise support military operations elsewhere. Over an extended conflict, those cumulative costs become increasingly significant. Weather and geography also play major roles. Southern Ukraine contains rivers, open terrain, rail corridors, and road networks that make certain bridges especially valuable. During periods of heavy military activity, losing access to one crossing can place additional pressure on alternative routes, increasing congestion and slowing deliveries. Military planners on both sides understand these geographical realities, which explains why transportation infrastructure remains such a frequent target. However, it is equally important to recognise the limits of infrastructure attacks. History shows that logistics disruptions alone rarely force a major military power to abandon its objectives. Success usually depends on combining those attacks with effective intelligence, sustained military pressure, political support, industrial production, and continued operational capability on the battlefield. In other words, bridge strikes can complicate military planning, but they are only one part of a much larger strategic picture. International support also continues influencing the conflict. Ukraine relies heavily on military assistance, intelligence sharing, and financial support from Western partners, while Russia continues investing heavily in domestic defence production and strengthening relationships with several international partners. As long as both sides maintain significant resources and external support, analysts believe the conflict is likely to remain a contest of endurance rather than a short-term military campaign. Perhaps the biggest question now is whether these infrastructure attacks signal the beginning of a broader operational strategy for the months ahead. If Ukraine continues targeting transportation corridors while Russia expands defensive measures, the battle may increasingly focus on logistics rather than direct frontline assaults. That would represent another evolution in a war that has already changed dramatically since it began. So, are these bridge strikes a turning point? The honest answer is that it's still too early to know. The immediate tactical impact may become clearer only after weeks of satellite imagery, battlefield reports, and official assessments. But one thing is already certain. Both Russia and Ukraine understand that controlling supply lines can be just as important as controlling territory. And as this war continues to evolve, the struggle over logistics may become one of the most decisive battles of all. In the final part, we'll examine whether this latest phase of the conflict could shape future peace negotiations, alter military planning on both sides, and what experts believe could happen next in the Russia-Ukraine war. After analysing the reported bridge strikes, Russia's logistics network, and the possible military responses, we arrive at the biggest question of all. Could this become a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war? The answer, at least for now, is that no one can say with certainty. Modern wars are rarely decided by a single operation. Instead, they are shaped by hundreds of decisions made over months and sometimes even years. One successful strike may grab headlines, but its true value depends on what happens next. If Ukraine can continue disrupting key logistics routes over an extended period while maintaining pressure across multiple sectors of the battlefield, Russian commanders may be forced to dedicate even more resources to protecting supply lines instead of supporting frontline operations. That doesn't necessarily mean Russia would lose territory immediately, but it could slow offensive operations, complicate planning, and increase the overall cost of maintaining military momentum. On the other hand, Russia has repeatedly demonstrated that it can adapt under pressure. Throughout this conflict, damaged infrastructure has often been repaired, alternative routes have been established, and military logistics have continued operating despite repeated attacks. Russia also possesses significant industrial capacity and engineering resources capable of restoring transportation networks. That means Ukraine's strategy would likely need to remain consistent over a long period to produce lasting operational effects rather than temporary disruptions. Another factor that cannot be ignored is technology. The Russia-Ukraine war has become one of the most technologically advanced conflicts in modern history. Long-range drones, precision-guided missiles, satellite intelligence, artificial intelligence, electronic warfare, and real-time reconnaissance have transformed how military operations are conducted. Every successful strike is quickly analysed by both sides, leading to new defensive tactics and new offensive methods. It has become a constant cycle of innovation and adaptation. The international dimension remains equally important. Ukraine continues receiving military, financial, and intelligence support from several Western nations, while Russia continues expanding domestic defence production and strengthening partnerships with countries willing to maintain economic and strategic cooperation. As long as both sides retain substantial resources and external support, many experts believe this conflict is more likely to remain a prolonged war of endurance than a rapidly concluded campaign. There is also the diplomatic question. Every major military development influences future negotiations, even when peace talks are not actively taking place. Battlefield momentum often shapes political leverage. If one side gains operational advantages, it may enter future negotiations from a stronger position. Conversely, sustained logistical pressure or battlefield setbacks can influence long-term strategic calculations. That is why every bridge strike, missile attack, and terrorist territorial change receives such close attention, not only from military commanders, but also from diplomats around the world. Perhaps the most important lesson from today's analysis is that wars are no longer fought only by soldiers at the front. Engineers repairing bridges, intelligence analysts studying satellite imagery, drone operators controlling aircraft from hundreds of kilometers away, cybersecurity specialists protecting communications, and logistics teams managing supply routes all play essential roles. Modern warfare has become a competition between entire systems rather than simply opposing armies. So, are Ukraine's reported bridge strikes significant? Absolutely. Could they reshape the battlefield? Possibly. Will they decide the outcome of the war by themselves? Based on everything we know today, that appears unlikely. Their true impact will depend on whether they become part of a sustained, long-term strategy capable of creating cumulative pressure across Russia's logistics network. As new satellite imagery, official statements, and independent battlefield assessments become available, we'll gain a clearer understanding of just how effective these operations have been. Until then, the most responsible approach is to separate confirmed facts from speculation and continue following developments as they unfold. If you found this in-depth military analysis valuable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Emily Carter, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of global conflicts, geopolitics, military strategy, and world affairs. Thanks for watching, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.